Hi there, Bob Beechell here again with another quick review. This time it's my new M2 Mac Studio. Okay, so I've gone and bought one of the new Mac Studios from Apple. I got the M2 Max version, just the base model, well, the base model with a little bit of extra, which I'll explain in a moment. I didn't go for the M2 Ultra. That's much too powerful for me and much too expensive. So what I did was I got the base M2 Max model, which has a 12-core CPU, a 30-core GPU. I didn't bother upgrading to 38. 30 is more than enough. It has a 16-core neural engine. That's standard. The base model has 32 gigabyte of RAM. Again, you can upgrade that as high, I think, as 96, but I mean 32 gigabyte is a huge amount. Again, more than enough for me. Now, the one upgrade that I made was to the SSD. The base model comes with a 512 gigabyte SSD. I upgraded to the 1 terabyte. And I did this for two reasons. Firstly, I did want the extra capacity. I'm intending to use it mainly for editing video files like this one, and I've got a new Sony camera now which produces larger video files than my previous one. But secondly, more importantly, I wanted the fastest SSD speeds. You may be aware, you may have seen some of the reviews that are being done and some of the tests that have been done showing that the base Mac Studio, in common with the base M2 MacBook Air, only has a single SSD chip on the motherboard. I think it's called a NAND chip, rather than two, which is what the 1 terabyte model that I've got has. And it turns out, and this has been clearly shown by the bench tests, that the speed with a single SSD is pretty much half what it is with two. Now, the speeds are still very respectable, but I did want the fastest speeds. I thought if I'm going to spend this amount of money, I do want the fastest SD speeds available. And anyway, as I said, I wanted the extra capacity anyway, so it was the best thing to do all around. So this Mac Studio, I'm running it with two displays. It does actually support up to five, I believe, 5 displays up to 6K at 60 Hertz. I'm running it with two, again, more than enough for me. My main display is my Apple Studio display, which I reviewed a few months back, which of course is 5K. My second display, what acts as the extended display, is an HP U28 4K HDR monitor. I think I've mentioned that before. Again, another lovely display, not quite as good in my view as the studio display, but not far off. That's 28-inch, the studio display is 27-inch. But at the HP is 4K. Well, of course, it runs both of these displays perfectly fine at full color depth and at 60 Hertz. No problem at all, of course, given that the M2 Max will support, in fact, up to 5 displays of that type. I can't see me adding an extra display in the future, but you never know. It's nice to have that facility, that feature if I do. Now, as the input devices goes, I have a Apple Magic keyboard, the one with Touch ID and a numeric keypad. I have a Magic trackpad, and I have, for my sins, the Magic Mouse too. And these are all the new black models, which they brought out about a year or so ago, was it? Which I really like. They do look really good. So I've got those as my input devices, and they, of course, work excellently, being Apple devices. Now, one of the nice features about the Mac Studio is it has excellent connectivity. And it has ports both front and back, something the Mac Mini doesn't have, which I think is unfortunate. On the back, you've got 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, two of which I'm using for my displays. Those are Thunderbolt 4, so they're the fastest. They provide the fastest data speed of, I think it's up to 40 gigabits per second. There's also a couple of USB-A ports, which I believe supply up to 5 gigabits per second. There's an HDMI port which supports the latest standard 2.1, which means it will drive a display at a 4K display at 120 hertz, I believe. I don't have such a display, but again, it's nice to have that future-proof. There's a 10 gigabit, let me just check that. Yeah, 10 gigabit Ethernet port. Again, I don't use that because I use Wi-Fi for my connection to my router, but it's possible in future I might use that. So again, that's nice to have. Finally, there is a headphone, which is like the ones on the new MacBook Pros. That is, it supports high impedance headphones, and it's connected to an inbuilt DAC, which will support lossless files up to 96 kilohertz 24-bit, which is nice because that means you can play not the highest high-res Apple Music files, but certainly better than CD. You can play some of the high-res ones. And I have a nice pair of Hi-Fi Man headphones attached to that. Okay, what about performance? Well, what can I say? I mean, it's absolutely stellar. All the reviews, of course, have pointed out how good the new M2 chips are. I mean, the M1 chips were fantastic. The M2s are even better. The M2 Max is excellent. In fact, I've seen some reviews which have shown benchmark tests indicating that the M2 Max is actually on a par with the previous M1 Ultra. So that really is a significant improvement, and I was glad I waited until the M2 version of the Mac Studio came out before I went for one. I did think about the M1 version, but I'm glad I waited for the M2. Of course, that means that it will handle anything that I throw at it, whether it's editing large video files, 4K files. I mean, apparently it will handle 8K files, 8K video files very easily too. Can't see me ever using it for that in the near future. 4K is perfectly adequate. It, of course, has 32 gigabyte RAM, so you can even put that up to 96, but 32 gigabyte is ample for multitasking. That's far more than I've ever had on a computer before. The most I ever had was 24 gigabyte that I had on my old iMac 27-inch. This is 32 gigabyte of unified memory. I mean, it means that it sails through any task that you want. Of course, having the fastest SSD speeds helps as well at all. Don't forget, of course, that the M2 chips have the built-in encode and decoders for video, particularly for ProRes, which makes them particularly useful, of course, if you are recording in ProRes and editing those files in Final Cut Pro, which is what I do. So performance is simply, fantastic. I can't imagine anyone, unless you are really, really pushing it to its very limit, to being disappointed with the performance of this machine. And this, of course, is the M2 Max. If you really want the highest possible, you can go for the M2 Ultra. That does cost a significant extra amount of money, but it is there. But I think for vast majority, 99% of people will be more than happy with the performance of the M2 Max. The other thing I should point about the performance, which is amazing. Again, this has been true of the M series chips, of course, or before, is that the performance they achieve fantastic performance with very little power usage compared to Intel chips. This, of course, means that in laptops you get amazing battery life. Now, of course, that doesn't matter here with a desktop. But what it does mean here on my desktop is that the Mac Studio just never gets hot. It has an excellent cooling system built into it, but you never hear the fans. I've never heard the fans at all. They could be on. I suspect they are on, but spinning very quietly. You certainly can't hear them. The Mac Studio never gets hot to the touch. It remains perfectly cool, even when you're editing large video files or large raw picture files. It's really a great thing to get that performance without the noise that you typically get when the fans come on, or without the heat. So that is one of the great features of Apple Silicon, and it's even better in these M2 chips than it was, I think, in the M1 chips. So those are my general thoughts. As you can see, I'm very pleased with this Mac Studio. It was expensive, but it's going to last me a good few years. So I think it's going to turn out to be a good buy. So should you buy it? Well, you can probably guess I'm going to say yes, assuming it's within your budget, and assuming that you are wanting to use it for, say, video editing and other fairly CPU or GPU intensive tasks. I don't think I can guarantee that if you did buy one of these M2 Mac Studios, you're not going to be disappointed in any respect. I think I'd be incredibly surprised if that was the case. So I would heartily recommend this Mac Studio. The M2 Max, I say, is more than adequate. There's no need to go for the M1 Ultra, which I think is almost double the price, unless you really are needing that very, very top-end performance. But for the vast majority of people, the M2 Max rather is more than adequate. As I say, the base model is again more than adequate, except I would definitely recommend upgrading the SSD to 1 terabyte so that you get the fastest speed, so that you end up with an incredibly fast, powerful computer